So we are doing a conference. We're doing our first one, and it's going to be a 1-day summit like thing. We haven't named it yet. In March, and I'm just thinking it would be great to have you here for that.
What's your topic or what's your focus?
So we are challenging
disrupting the senior living industry.
And so the goal is to have a keynote speaker who sets the stage for the day, sets the theme, and it's all, we have to hang tight.
Yep.
Oh, yeah. I don't know actually how to turn that stuff off. That'll do it? Okay.
Sorry about that. I've never had that happen.
So a speaker to set the stage for disrupting, and then we have an educational session or two maybe, but I think the big goal is to have 3 challenges for senior care and have breakout groups that have to go and talk about that challenge and see what kind of solutions, if they can, come up with anything and come back and present those. And the requirement for each of those groups is that they have people from different perspectives. So we have a family member, an executive director of a senior care big box, a group home leader, doctors, physical therapists, all the people who provide care together in one room.
So it's interesting. I actually participated in a very similar kind of event about a year ago down in Tucson.
Really?
It was sort of an invite only. Lynn Katzman and David Barnes and David Freshwater sort of cooked it up. And so there were a lot of local people from sort of the healthcare world in the Tucson area. And then there were about 8 or 10 sort of fairly significant, senior living leaders. Bob Kramer was there, and Sean Kelly, and me, Lynn Katzman. There was somebody there from ASHA, and I'm trying to think who the other providers were. It seemed like there was at least one more provider, but I can't remember who it was. So,
how did it go? Did it work well to have everyone in the room and talking?
Yeah, it did. We had sort of a combination, and it was mostly sort of there were about half presentations and half sort of thought discussions. I ran a discussion on sort of the future of senior living, and then they had sort of a structured exercise come up. I think what they, if I recall, they did is they had sort of presented 4 different possible scenarios, and then asked a group of 8 or 10 people to sort of work on that for 45 minutes, and then present their thinking. And did it change the world? The answer clearly is no. But did it help spur thinking to help things move further down the road? I think the answer is yes. These are long, difficult processes, and they're experiments, and we think about stuff, and we talk about stuff, and we try stuff, and then we go back and reiterate, and then we have people come in from the left field, who are doing small homes like you guys are doing, and like Gene Garino's pushing with his stuff, and we figure it out. So
yeah, and I think that's the thing is we know we can't do it overnight, but we have to have the conversations, we have to spur the thinking, and then we have to challenge people to take action, and then start. So I think the goal would be to have this event kick off some of the thinking and then circle back in 3 months or 6 months or whatever with the same group or a different group and some of the same group, and keep building on that kind of thinking, like what has worked in the experiment and what hasn't, what do we need to change, and what did we see come from it, what can we learn from it.
Yeah, because and that's kind of what we've been following a couple of your articles that I loved out there about how we rethink this design aspect that you've really hit home, looking at how we create a different type of design. That's what I want to dive deeper into, is we've got to break away from our one size fits all approach.
Yep.
Yeah,
Perfect.
We've totally dived into it. We
Yeah.
can edit all of
Yeah,
this.
we can
and
edit
start
it out,
with
yeah.
the
Did
beginning.
you guys see the Wall Street Journal article from a couple of days ago?
On the boomers want to stay home.
Yeah, the boomers want to stay home. Senior housing now faces a budding glut.
Yep.
It's interesting for them to say that because all the industry stuff I see says, in fact, Nick's occupancy numbers were a tad bit better this last quarter, and so everybody's really hanging their hat on the fact that the Nick numbers were better, and we got all this population is growing older, and we won't have enough senior living buildings to take care of them all, which I am almost singularly of belief that they're wrong about that.
I think that you are correct. I think what we currently have is already outdated and no one wants to live in those places. And I think that's what we're realizing. And then I also think too is that home care costs are going to force people into alternative living environments because if everybody wants to stay at home right now in the Denver area, we average 30 to 35 an hour for home care services. But I also think we're pricing people out of any type of senior living, assisted living. Period.
We are. It's a big problem. So I am not sure where that's all gonna shake out. It's the whole thing is really a mess. I do think the small resident. I mean, I'm a big fan, and I know this is you're working, but I'm just a huge fan of the small residential home. I think that it has the single biggest ability to be flexible in price range, frankly.
Correct.
And I see stuff that is that is barely you could afford with just Social Security. I mean, it's very basic, and then I see stuff that's crazy luxurious that's $10,000 and $12,000 in the small residential home. There's a place you've probably been to because it's your neck of the woods. There's a place in Boulder that does memory care, and they've 12 or 15 residents.
I think it's
beautiful house.
Yeah, it's the boutique one that's up there. I think it's 15 residents. I remember.
Yeah, and it's like $12,000 or $14,000 a month. I mean, it's just insanely crazy. But it is. Have you been there?
A long time ago, right when they kind of were. I'm trying to think when I was. I feel like I had been there, but it's been a while.
I'm curious.
Yeah. I mean, it's really neat. So I just think that there's this huge range that people have options for, and that's just really, really good.
But what about this idea too that we are used to living in our own residential house, right? And then all of a sudden we go from a single family home to a high rise with 100 other people. I mean, to me, that kind of breaks that philosophy that we're used to living by ourselves and not in this communal type living environment. Yet when we get the need for care, we have to go to a communal environment.
Well, I think I guess I sort of this is an area where again I think that it's an area that we need to figure out. But what I see is that we know. I mean, there's really good data that says that isolation and loneliness. And really at any age, but particularly seniors are more susceptible, older people are more susceptible to it once they lose the ability to drive, right?
Mhm.
So everybody says they want to stay home, and I get that. But imagine you were stuck at home and that you couldn't, in fact, you couldn't get out to socialize, you couldn't go to churches, you couldn't go to church, you couldn't really get out to eat. You were just stuck there. And once a day for 2 to 8 hours, somebody who is completely different ethnicity, background, social background, educational background comes in and is your companion to clean your house and give you a bath. Is that really? I mean, but you're living in your own home. Is that really what you want?
It's all.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
It's so individualized, I think, and it so depends on the setting and
Sure.
The services that are available that you choose to use, and how do you take those and create exactly what you need as an individual, and maybe they're stepping
Right.
which I think is what they were designed for, really, is to be that stepping stone so that you have the in-home care for a period of time while you're still independent until that point where you can't be, and then maybe you transition, maybe you don't. Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, the CCRC model is in many respects a really good model because it allows people typically come in their mid 70s. They tend to be a big group of older people who are active and vibrant and doing things and living life and all those kinds of things, which is really, really terrific. But even there, the challenge that I see, there are two challenges that I see in that arena. The first is that I'm not really that crazy about living with a bunch of other old people.
Yeah.
And I agree with
Most
you.
of my friends, what's that?
I agree with you. I think you're spot on.
Yeah, I mean, most of my friends, most of my colleagues, I'm probably, I'm older than by probably 10 years, pretty much everybody I hang out with on a regular basis. And frankly, when I look at it, the people who are my age or a little bit older than me, they don't have enough energy for me. I don't want to be around that. That would be an awful experience, and my dad turned 91 over the weekend, and he still lives. His wife's quite a bit younger, but he still lives at home and he still drives, and he's certainly slowing down, and he's got some balance stuff. But and he'd probably do at this point at 91, he'd probably do pretty well in a senior living community because he'd be an old guy there. But I don't, and I teach a bunch of fifth and sixth graders at church every week, and I'm really, really good at it. And I've got kids coming back to visit me, and that's my life. My life isn't with a bunch of old people. I go to a church with a bunch of old people, and I don't like them that much.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I know
Well,
what you
so
mean.
so taking that into account, how would you, in your eyes, design the aging process then?
So I think that at some point in time, so I live in a house that's 2,300 square feet on a half acre, and I've got a garden, and I've got sort of I got a hot tub in the back, and I've got two areas of lawn that need to be mowed by somebody, and I've still got to pick up dog poop because I've got this big 100-pound lab and all those kinds of things, right?
Okay.
And probably there's going to be at some point, and then I look around my house, and I got a lot of stuff, my wife and I. And I'm getting old enough where I'm looking at it and thinking, I don't need any more stuff. In fact, I've actually got too much stuff. I got way more stuff than I need. And I'll have to make a decision. We'll have to make a decision. Are we going to try to get rid of a bunch of that stuff we don't really need or use, and or are we just going to dump that all on my kids when we die, and my kids will have to deal with it? Kind of what happened when my mom died and my grandmother died, and it'll be somewhere in the future. I mean, there's still going to be some stuff they're going to have to deal with regardless. But I start looking around at the stuff I have, and I think I don't really want to get rid of it, but I don't know that it really increases my value very much. So I think where I would like to end up is probably in a some sort of a communal setting where but it would be multi generational,
Yeah.
and it would be a place where I can be active. Um, I can contribute. I can give back. One of the big problems we face is there's huge stigma attached to living in senior living. So I know people who are in CCRCs who are still young, who are still productive, who are still working, and once they tell people they live in a senior living community, they immediately look at them and say, "Oh, you're one of those old people." And so, John Cochrane at Human Good used to tell this story. Maybe he still does, about a resident they had who lived in one of their communities, and he was still the CEO of some sort of a tech startup, and he was getting patents and just doing, multi-million dollar company. And they wanted to do a story to highlight him because they thought it was really cool. And he refused to do it. He said, if, if, if my investors find out I'm living in a senior living community, it'll kill my business. I mean, that's really bad.
That's
So, and honestly, when you watch how we senior living providers we senior living providers are like the most ageist group of people in the whole world. We treat our residents like cute little people who don't really have anything to contribute. So, David Stewart at Ageist talks about how as people are aging and the research they're doing, they want two things. They want to be able to be the best me, and they want to stay relevant. And when you think about it, what senior living does is makes it harder to be the best me, and they make senior residents really super irrelevant.
Yes, and we just had that conversation yesterday with Jill Vitale Awesome, who is the CEO of the Eden Alternative.
And she was
Yep.
on our
She was on our Facebook Live, and we had that very conversation. But I want to go back to something really quickly. We just talked about how we don't want to live in a senior living community because it's a bunch of old people.
Dang.
Oh, hang on.
I don't know how to take that.
Oh, it just adds color.
Yeah,
I don't even know how to tap.
yeah, it's okay. We'll edit.
I
It's
know.
all good, and it shows life,
Yeah.
right? This is real life.
That's right.
I have my little puppy here, so it's real life.
Yep.
So we just talked about how we don't want to live in a senior living community because it's a bunch of old people. But now we're talking about the stigma of living in senior communities. So
And the lack of, so Jill was very big on hitting purpose driven, which I think is the best way to look at it and get away from this patient centric, but more.
you're gonna have to say that again.
Jill was really talking about the idea of the importance of purpose driven care. And I firmly agree with her that we have to get away from this idea. It's patient centric, it's person centric, where they need to have purpose, whether that purpose is folding laundry, sweeping the deck, doing repairs around the residence, whatever, cutting the lawn. I think we have to go back to that methodology. Is just because you're a resident doesn't mean you can't participate and support your community.
Yeah, I'm gonna. Oh man, you're getting into it with me. So
I love
I
it.
don't know. I don't know that folding laundry or mowing the lawn. I think those. See, I worry a lot that we have called those things purposeful activities because those are things we do because we have to do, and I think there's a generation. I've talked to people where they've said, where their 80 and 90-year-old mom comes to visit, and what she loves to do is do the laundry and the housekeeping because that was her life, right? And I think there's still some people out there, but I mean, let me ask you. You think when you're 80, 90 years old, you think that mowing the lawn and folding the laundry and picking up dog poop is going to represent purpose to you?
So I think it's those are example activities, but those aren't the activities. And I think it depends on what drives you. So if I was an accountant in life, maybe I want to help with the books, or if I was I don't even know, a teacher, maybe I want to teach them classes. Yeah. So I think
So those are
individual purpose, right?
And that's what I was getting at. Those are probably the wrong ones to use because I agree. I think maybe 5% of people actually enjoy cutting their lawn, maybe, and picking up dog poop.
I love cutting the
That's
lawn.
right.
Me a sense of accomplishment.
You
I
do?
loved it. Yeah.
Oh,
I don't live in a home.
Well, then that's great. That's great. Then that's great. You can come mow my lawn. Actually, I've got a guy who I painted it because I don't get much enjoyment of it.
No,
but I guess but here's the other thing that I don't really hear people talking about very much is I go to church in a church that's fairly aging, and what I don't know is I think there's a reality that we don't actually. I think the purposeful living is terrific. And I think senior living operators have an obligation to both create and inspire opportunities for purposeful living. But I'm not. I think there are a lot of people out there that actually don't have much interest in doing more than being just entertained and sitting. And you've got to figure out how to sort of how. We've got to recognize that not everybody is the same, and maybe not everybody really wants purpose, and we can't force purpose on people who don't want purpose, right?
Yep.
And so I don't know why I don't see anybody talking about that. And I'm a big believer in this purpose thing. And so it's really hard for me to go there. But I think we have to look at that and say, what is, what do we do with that? Do we just accept that? Are there things we can do to enhance that life? I don't know.
I think that what you're hitting on is it comes down to every single individual person. And what does that person need and want? And you can't force. There was an article recently on, and it might have been you, Steve, who shared it. So tell me if it was on the fact that if you were an introvert in life, you don't suddenly become an extrovert when you go into senior living. And now suddenly you want to participate in every activity there is. If you were an introvert, you want to hang out in your room. That's what you do. That's your life. It's what you know. Your friends, family, etc., will come visit you, but you can't force everyone into one box. And I think that's part of what
You
you're
can't.
really hitting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, most people sort of sit somewhere in the middle of this introvert extrovert. And the truth is that even most introverts need at least a relationship or two. I mean, you don't really have introverts who don't need anybody. They just tend to not like crowds and not a lot of
Right.
people. They don't do well. It sucks the energy out of it. And so I worry a lot. I mean, it's a really complicated problem. I had friends that whose father lived in a senior living community, and they really struggled because he just would not go down and participate in activities. And he didn't have a lot of desire. And of course, the senior living community, they'd go to him, they say, "Hey, Marvin, we're doing this thing. You want to come down?" "No, I don't want to come down." Well, to some degree, you've got to figure out how to balance that, and you've got to make some assessments. So did he not come down because he was an introvert and it would have been bad for him, or did he not come down because they weren't doing the things that really met his needs? And I think that the question is, do I, as a senior living operator, do I actually really take the time to figure out and say, what is it that's going to make my resident the best me that they can be, that they want to be? And I don't know that just saying go do whatever you want to do and we're going to help it is good enough. I think that sometimes it's to inspire people. I think sometimes it's to give people ideas. I think it's really complex, and it's not easy. I mean, I've got if I'm going to shift to the employee side. If I've got an employee who's a care aide for me, and they've come to this idea that all they can ever be is a care aide, but maybe there's this tiny little, mustard seed size idea they'd like to be more than that, but they don't really think it could happen. Should I just accept that and say, okay, they can't, that's the best they're going to be, and that's all they're dreaming? They're not dreaming any bigger than being a care aide or maybe a lead care aide? Or do I look at that and do I have an obligation to say, let's see if we can figure out how we can help you go to whatever next step you want to go?
Yeah, and so there's a couple things there. One in particular is, how realistic is it for us to create individualized attention the way that we just talked about? So for this particular individual in a big box, we assess, are they an introvert, or can we entice them to come out to this group and meet their needs better when we have 100 residents that we have to do that for, and we have a shortage of employees and they're turning over all the time.
But going off of what Steve said with the employee aspect, could it be that because we are not inspiring them to think bigger than just being a care aide, that we are having this turnover issue, that we're not really empowering them to go beyond that?
Exactly. And I think that's the second part. And I was just rereading one of your articles, Steve, I think from May, about, do we really have a caregiver shortage, or do we have a problem with how we're treating our employees and training our employees?
Oh, and the question that we have a turnover problem. The turnover problem is much bigger than the recruitment problem, because if the recruitment problem would be manageable if we did a better job of taking care of our team members. But and this is, so you've taken me down a whole new path, but here's the question. The question is, do I really, we tend to substitute programs for caring. And what I mean by that is we love to buy, an employee reward program. So you'd be nice, somebody gives you a coupon, you go buy a jacket or a Starbucks card or something. Or we have these programs. But I think that mostly when you look at really great care cultures, it's because there's some leadership at the very top that says, I'm just crazy, nuts, insane about helping people to be the best me in their job. I've actually got an article that's about maybe only 100 words written, that sort of tackles this issue of, what does it mean to be the best me as an employee? And do I really care, or do I just want them to do my job? Do your job and then go home and I'll pay you a check for that.
That's a cool way to look
Yeah,
at it. That's
interesting.
fantastic. Because I think, as you said earlier, you can do it for both. Be the best me as an employee, but then make sure that employee is helping that resident be the best me as well too. So I think that's a very profound and will have some positive impact once implementation of that begins to occur.
Well, look at Southwest Airlines. I mean, it's probably the most fun airline to fly, right? And why is it fun? Now the you know, sort of from a policy standpoint, what they've really said is we're going to give you permission to be fun. So if you want to do a fun jingle as your safety thing, that's okay. If you want to, if you find somebody who's got a birthday and you want to use your whole call light system like candles and light everybody up and sing happy birthday on the whole airplane, that's okay. I've got a friend of mine who's a Southwest pilot, and he does this halfway contest. And when he flies the Hawaii route, and he gives people a chance to guess when they hit the halfway point. And then they give away prizes, you know, and they're either candy bars or old charts, is what. And most people, interestingly enough, choose old charts. But they just do, and oftentimes he'll actually do a coloring contest. And so what they've done is they've created permission, but it's not really a program. It's a mindset. It's a mindset. The question is how do we get to this mindset for both residents and for team members?
So it's making it playful again. And again, though, it's adding the fun back into senior living.
It is. It is.
About into life, right? Just it doesn't matter. It's about sparking joy wherever they are.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, I went to the next spring conference in San Diego, and I was back down the next week for a digital marketing conference. When I was at the NIC conference, I was probably sort of median age, right? Maybe a little bit on the older side, but probably pretty close to right in the middle. When I went to the digital marketing conference, I'm sure I was from an age standpoint, I was probably in the top 5 or 10%. But the thing that wasn't actually what struck me. The thing that really struck me was they actually just had a lot of fun. I mean, they were doing serious business, but they actually had a lot of fun at the conference. It was higher energy. They didn't take themselves too seriously. They laughed at each other, and it was kind of cool.
Yeah, we went to the NIC conference. We had an
That's-
interesting experience.
Yeah, that was the first fall Nick conference in Chicago we went to, where we obviously met you and Farah, and
Oh, right.
it was an eye-opening experience to be in that environment and the
Yeah.
seriousness that was going on.
Yeah, it is so. It is. Once you become an insider, it's actually a lot of fun because that's where all my people are. And so
Gotcha.
I really I love the NIC conferences. But I remember the first one I went to, and I was still working for Vigil Health Solutions as a salesperson. It's already started the blog, and I was the only person there from the company. I didn't know anybody. Actually, that's not true. There was another guy who had a ticket, and he showed up the first day. I never actually saw him on the evening cocktail, and he was so intimidated by it, he never came back.
Oh,
And I walked in, and I didn't know anybody, and it was like, oh man, I don't know what to do. And I look around, and I said, oh man, there's Bob Kramer over there. And, you know, there are all these people that I know well now, right? And I went back to my room, and I had this conversation with myself about what am I going to do with this, and I set a goal to meet 100 people. And I just wander around and say, hi, my name is Steve Moran. I set a goal to meet 100 people. So that's why I dropped in to talk to you. And about 85, 90% of the time, people were really good and they were curious and we had good conversations. And 10 or 15% of the time, people weren't very nice. And maybe I was being a jerk. I don't know.
that's
a great goal, especially for a networking event. So, Steve,
Yep.
Take the 60,000 foot view of senior care. What do you think the 3 biggest challenges are that we need to disrupt?
So I think the biggest challenges is the first we need to, well, I think to disrupt, I don't know exactly how to answer, but I'll give you sort of 3 things that I think are really significant. I think that we have to acknowledge that moving into senior living is today and probably will always mostly be a decision made because people need help with something. They've got cognitive decline, or they need help with activities of daily living. I think that if we could figure out, I do think that if we could figure out how to create a kind of senior living product that was multi-generational and would allow me to still be the best me, but live in a more congregate setting, I think that could be a huge win. But we still face this idea that every data point you look at says people would rather stay in their age in their old home. So how do you change that paradigm where people go, oh yeah, actually probably would be really better off if I lived in a more congregate or communal environment. So I think that the being able to maybe tell that story in a way that is really compelling is a big challenge. I think the other thing is that we just don't know what having having a great life at 70 and an active life at 70 and 80 really looks like. I mean, it's never happened before in history, right? So we're all trying to figure this out together because we don't really have a model for what that looks like. And so it's a matter of exploring and thinking about it and trying things. The challenge, of course, is that trying things when we're talking about a housing standpoint is means that means big dollars invested in something that isn't readily adaptable to something else. And so it's kind of it's rolling the dice with a lot of dollars, which is why people are so cautious about it. And then I think the third thing that's really significant is we've got to figure out um, how to solve the staffing problem. And even when the economy was not so good and the unemployment rate was higher, staffing was still a problem. Turnover, it was not as big a problem because it was easier to hire people, but people didn't like their jobs anymore. They weren't any more enthusiastic about it. And if we can, I think if we can get the employee thing right, what will happen is we'll make residents will be more independent. They'll be happier. Team members' jobs will be easier, and they'll actually love coming to work. I mean, when you think about it, it ought to be the best job in the whole world, right? You get to come in and yeah, you got work to do, giving baths and cleaning houses, but you get to have all these great conversations with people. And so I think figuring that out so it becomes more of an ecosystem. I mean, maybe the communal living needs to be some sort of a subsidized housing for part of the community and then residents in part of the community. And the housing would be very different, modest for that, but in a way to make it economic, and you can provide meals. I don't know. I think there are going to be. I don't think there's a single solution. I do think that the small Francis, that you're doing with the smaller residential model has serious legs. I see more and more interest of that. There was actually a little bit of conversation about it. I don't know whether you were in that session, but there's a little bit of conversation about it at the next conference this fall. And so the opportunity, there are just tons of opportunities out there. I just think the big message is um, doing it the way we've always done it and expecting to make buckets of money is the wrong way to look at it.
Yes.
That is what we totally agree with.
You're singing from our sheets of music over here. That
Cool.
Doing it the same way and expecting different results is what the definition of insanity or something like.
Yep.
Because I do agree with you, Steve. The idea of not reinventing, but looking at how we have more communal living between staff and the team and the residents, that has to be brought into play. And I think you could find a way to make a portion of it affordable for the staff members. Having affordable housing for your team within that same community could be paramount for that culture and that sense, a true sense of intergenerational community. And that's definitely something we're trying to figure out is how do you actually do that and, begin to kind of almost redesign your developments of not just senior developments, but your housing developments in general.
There was an article, gosh, I can't remember where it is. I think I've still got a bookmark someplace because I'd like to write about it. But there's a tech company that's actually providing sort of almost dorm-like communal living for mostly these young single 20-something tech folks where
I
they
saw,
have common
yes.
dining and stuff. And they don't really look very much like the frontline workforce in senior livings, and so I don't think you could do it exactly like that. But I find myself, wondering. I mean, maybe there's sort of a hybrid between that and mean, you look at the cruise ship model, right? So in a cruise ship, you've got all these floors that none of the passengers get to go to that would probably look pretty grim to most of the passengers where the cruise stays. And they're working long days and they're making by the Western standards terrible money, but in most cases by the standards of the country, it's coming from their great money, and it's adequate for them, and they're great jobs, and they work really hard to hold on to those jobs. And honestly, the cruise ships don't actually treat their people very well because they've got people lined up to take those jobs, and so it's not quite slave labor, but it might be close. But there may be some lessons in that. How do could you create um, a series of small, 500 or 600 square foot small homes where people could live in them on the campus and think about it. You have a school there and you have kids playing and you've got the older residents and it might be pretty cool.
It'd be amazing. That's
I think so too. Yeah. And I know a lot of people talk about the intergenerational aspect. I don't know how many people are doing it.
Well, I think most communities have little tiny pieces of it, right? They have school kids that come in. There are a few places where they have, preschools and come in, or kindergarten, first grade that teach as part of it. But it's pretty small and it's pretty small, it's sporadic. Most communities are doing some kinds of purposeful activities. It's just not that it's necessarily that it's continuous enough.
Yeah.
But I'm actually really optimistic. It's really, really messy right now. And I think the messiness is actually great news because it means we have lots of opportunity to experiment and try new stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really good point. So we like to end our podcasts with a couple of things. One, how are you creating hope today for senior care?
So I think that we do two things. I'm always dreaming and asking people to think about how they're doing it. I'm feeding resources, sometimes in the industry of people who are doing cool things, and sometimes things from outside the industry that I think could be adapted for senior living. Um, I am, it's funny because I think that people sort of see me as almost the conscience of senior living, where I talk about the hard truths and uh, address some of the stuff that nobody really wants to talk about. And I think that's a fair assessment. But I think that I'm also very positive. I try to, when I tackle hard stuff, to offer solutions and paths to get better. And I know that, and I frankly I know that we're making a difference. I talk to readers all the time or say, we read that article and that really helped us, or we're trying this thing, or you got us thinking about something we hadn't really thought about before. And and that's really cool. It's really cool to know that we're making a difference in these organizations.
That's fantastic. And it's one of the things that we love about you, Steve, is that you do take on the hard topics. And that's what we're striving to do as well.
Speaking of that, real quick, did you ever get a response back from the New York Times when you wrote to them at all?
No, but I actually, Farah actually introduced me to a publicist who has deep connections in big media.
Mhm.
And I had breakfast with him last week, and I've sent him my draft article,
Oh, cool.
and I have told him that if he can get a place someplace, I will pay for it. So I would. So I'm hoping that in the next few weeks he'll. He's gonna. He At this point in time, we're working on our relationship. So he said, "Well, I'll do a pro bono. I'm not crazy about doing that, but if he gets it, then he should charge me. Particularly if he gets it, he should charge me money, and I'd be glad to pay it because it's a story that needs to be said. I may have to cut it down because it's 2,000 words right now, which is a little bit long, but."
Hey, that's awesome.
And this is what article?
The article in response to the New York Times is basically just beating up the negative, just focusing solely on the negativity of senior living, long term care.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
And it's not. The article I wrote honestly is only obliquely. I don't know that I actually referenced it. After thinking about it, I didn't want to just do a rebuttal. I said it's sort of this is what it really looks like growing older in America and tapping into senior services. So
Yeah, that's great.
it's actually a pretty positive article. It's just a more realistic view of let's have it
Yes, so bringing reality to it, which helps break the stigma,
Mhm.
which is really
Yep.
one of the key things that we're all after. So, how,
Yep.
if people want to learn more about you and what you do, where can they find you?
Oh, of course, I love that question. So you go to Senior Living Foresight, all one word, .net, or you Google Senior Living and Steve Moran, and I will pop up on your Google search right at the top or near the top. But we have sort of a couple of ways. I'm very active on LinkedIn, and so following me on LinkedIn is, or the Senior Living Foresight page on LinkedIn is a terrific way. We also have a really fairly active Facebook group called Senior Living Leadership. We've got about 2,000 members in it. And once we crossed over about the 1900 membership, it had enough sort of critical mass. And so we see interesting posts in there almost every day. And we've seen some posts with a lot of back and forth and conversation. And so, if you're a leader in senior living and you're really passionate about, both learning and helping other people, that's a great place to go.
Awesome.
Terrific. Steve, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate you being here.
Yes.
Bet. Appreciate your the opportunity to come and chat with you.
Thank you. We'll
Excellent.
end the recording and just keep chatting.
Okay, so